This is Risa and welcome back to my stitch along series. In this video, I'm going to stitch along Lorna Bateman's Dragon Wreath Stumpwork Sampler Kit. Let's get started. So here's the fabric with the design screen printed on it, and here is what the completed Stumpwork embroidery design is going to look like. Absolutely gorgeous, and I can't wait to show you all the different Stumpwork techniques that Lorna has included in her design. The first thing I'm going to do is to stitch the muslin backing onto the main fabric by stitching running stitches along the edges, keeping the ends of the thread free to remove easily after completing the embroidery. I'm going to start by stitching all of the background embroidery with Chameleon 97 that's in the kit. You can also use DMC 3362 if you don't have that. The instructions actually say to use number 33 Chameleon, but that's not included in the kit. Either way, you can use any green floss that you have in the kit, that is DMC or Chameleon. So now I've just wounded all of the floss that were in the kit into bobbins to make it easier for me when I'm stitching. Here is the pack of needles that came with the kit, and I am going to use crewel number 9 to start stitching the stems with 97 Chameleon. Using 2 strands of the thread, I'm going to start by stitching this stem here in the picture. And I'm going to do that by first stitching a stem stitch. Super easy to do that for most of you. Essentially, make sure you're always stitching or bringing out the needle on the same side of the last stitch, and I'm gonna try and zoom in here so you can see what I mean. So essentially, I'm bringing out my needle to the left side of every stitch to ensure that the stem stitch looks uniform all along the stem of the wreath. I'm going to complete 1 row of stem stitches and then go back to the start and stitch a second row of stem stitches, again always staying on the left side of the stem stitch. Now I have a thicker stem which I am going to whip by inserting my needle under the stem stitches without piercing the fabric, so that way I can stitch a nice little tube for the stems in the design. Next, I'm going to start Cretan stitch here for the flat leaf of the pink rose, and I'm going to start the stitch from the front of the fabric so I don't have to turn the hoop over. Starting at the top, I'm going to first take the needle to the right and then the left, and then go across to the right, and before pulling the thread I am going to bring back the needle in the center, pull the thread taut, and then insert it in the left Now as the leaf gets wider, I'm going to go right across to the right and take out the needle somewhere to the right of the center vein, insert the needle back somewhere to the left of the center vein, and then take it out onto the left side of the leaf. I didn't have enough space at the tip of the leaf to do this, so essentially you take out the needle to the right of the vein and then insert it to the left of the vein, and then you keep going until you get to the bottom of the leaf. I'm going to stitch satin stitches for the strawberry leaves here, and that's pretty simple, you know, coming out on either side of the leaf edge and then inserting it in the center. Now for the grape leaves, I'm going to first start with satin stitches here at the top of the leaf, just because it's got too many curves, and then I will move to stitching Roumanian stitches. As you can see, I went all the way from the left to the right of the leaf and then inserted the needle in the center here, and then come out on the left, go all the way to the right, take out the needle in the center or just off center, and then insert the needle somewhere to the left of the center line. Very similar to the Cretan stitch, but there's a slight difference in the sense that you don't do it twice on either side. However, you just insert the needle once in the center. I'm going to start the flat unripe strawberry with pale pink French knots, and here I'm using 2 strands of thread, and I'm starting the stitch from the front of the embroidery hoop. I'm going to start with 4 loops around the needle, having larger French knots in the center, so this gives it a little bit more of a profile, and I'll subsequently reduce it to 3, 2, and then finally just 1 knot along the edges. And here I am mixing it up with some of the red floss that I have, and I'm adding the red and golden beads here to give it some texture. For the other two strawberries, I am going to first trace out the strawberry pattern onto a slip from the pattern that's in the instructions. And then I'm going to stitch French knots with 2 strands of red thread, as you can see with the first strawberry that I've completed here. And I'm going to stitch exactly the same with 1 loop of French knots around the outline of the strawberry. Now I'm going to cut out the slips, leaving sort of a 5 mm seam allowance around the strawberries. Here are the 2 strawberry slips. Now I'm going to pull the running stitches together to form a little bit of a cup, which I'm going to fill. So I'm going to just keep pulling it into a nice little round shape. Now I can see that it sort of doesn't fit in the pattern. The pattern seems to be slightly larger, so I'm going to pull it a little bit looser. And I'm thinking I'm going to fill these with either cotton or some leftover sort of embroidery floss that I have. So I'm going to take a little bit of this and just roll it in my palm, make a little ball, and stuff it into the slip here. I'm going to finish off the strawberries by stitching cast on bullion stitch here with milliner's 6 needle, and I'm going to use 2 strands of the green floss. Next, I'm going to stitch the padded acorns. Essentially, it's that one in the design, and for that I will need the freezer paper. So let me remove what I don't need in the meantime. And what I'm looking for is paper that has a rough edge to it, or rough side, while the others are pretty smooth. So the one with the rough bumpy side is the freezer paper. You can see it perhaps in the video. And I'm going to remove that and keep it aside to essentially trace the acorns. And I'm going to trace it on the smooth side and not the rough side of the freezer paper. I'm going to place the rough side of the freezer paper onto the felt here, and I will iron it, first placing a slip on top so that the freezer paper does not burn, and that essentially adheres the freezer paper onto the felt, which now allows me to cut out the shapes on the felt. I'm attaching the largest cutout shape with back stitches onto the fabric first. You could, reverse it and add the smallest and then subsequently add the larger ones, but I'm doing it the other way around. And once that's added, like so, it gives it a nice rounded shape. I will stitch satin stitches onto this. To form the cap of the acorn, I'm going to use tapestry needle number 28 here, and I am going to stitch it by using 2 strands of that thread, and I'm going to first stitch 2 rows or a double bar of straight stitches about 2/3 of the way down, and this will essentially anchor the detached chain stitches that I will stitch for the cap. For the detached chain stitch, I am just going to go under the anchor stitch here without essentially piercing the acorn or the fabric. So essentially just loop it around or under, and over the thread. I'm going to use a beading needle that's not in the kit. Now I like this one better because it has a gap in the needle and it holds the beading wire together. So I'm going to use a transparent beading wire here to stitch the beads. Now I've used a little bit of thread to knot the end of the beading wire because that helps to hold the knot in place so that it does not slip. So now I'm going to use sort of the maroon brownish beads here to stitch the beads into place on the acorns. For the covered beads, I'm going to use a fine milliner's needle and use one strand of the light brown thread. Now I'm going to start by sort of holding the end of the thread here and just loop around a few stitches through the bead to sort of arrest it in place. And then just keep covering the needle with the thread until you don't see the brown bead underneath. So this is going to take a bit of time and a lot of adjustment of the thread, as you can see. I did contemplate using 2 strands, and perhaps that would help, but I think it looks more intricate and fine with 1 strand of thread. I've completed covering the bead here, but there are a few gaps here and there, so I'm going to run a few extra stitches or loops around the bead to smooth those out before moving to the next stage, which is stitching the cap of the acorn. So this is the thread I'm going to use to attach the acorn to the fabric. And I'm going to just snip off those additional strands here, just being very careful not to obviously cut off the thread that I'm going to use. Here's the first acorn. Now I found it difficult to sort of add the cap around the acorn here, and so I found an easier way to do it, which I'm going to show you now. And essentially what I did, or what I'm going to do, is to arrest the acorn onto a needle on a pin cushion. So if you have a pin cushion, that'll be great. And you can use it to place the acorn onto a stand, which makes it easier while stitching. So now I'm going to use 2 strands of the dark brown thread. I'm going to insert the needle from the top of the acorn. So essentially, not on the side where I've left the little light brown thread to stitch to the fabric. So I'm going to pull through, and you'll see that I am going to just leave a little bit of the thread on the top of the acorn. Now that's going to get arrested like so, and then I'm going to hold it up here, so watch carefully. Use my finger to sort of arrest it in place, turn it around, and then insert the needle through that loop. So now I have a little circle, and then I'll go 1 more round around the acorn and insert the needle through both of those loops, and that's gonna rest it in place like so. In order to keep that circle or band up, I also stitched under the light brown threads. Now I'm just going to continue the detach chain stitch by stitching under that band. Now I'm also stitching under the underlying threads just to keep that first row nice and stable so it doesn't slip as I stitch the subsequent rows of the detach chain stitch. Now I'm going to stitch the second row, and I'm going to use the loops of the previous stitch to anchor my chain stitch here. And in this case, I am not inserting the needle through the underlying threads. So it's just a floating detached chain stitch here. I've removed the bead from the pin cushion now that I have 2 rows of a stable sort of anchor around the acorn, and now it's much easier to continue stitching the detached chain stitch. Now that I've completed the acorns, I'm going to keep them aside and then stitch them onto the fabric after I've completed some of the other flat work embroidery. Next, I'm going to stitch the purple beads that are in the kit for the grapes, and I am going to stitch straight stitches here about the width of each bead to ensure that the bead sits flat on the leaf. So if you stitch it too close to where you've entered the fabric, you would have the top of the bead facing upwards, and that would not look nice. So I'm going to stitch these beads randomly as the first layer. Now that I've added the base layer, I'm going to add a few more beads on the top to give it a nice shape of the grapes sitting on the leaf. In the meantime, if you're still watching this video, congrats for getting this far on your project. But don't forget to click on the subscribe and like buttons if you haven't already done so to support my channel. Now next up, I am going to show you how to stitch the snail in the Stumpwork kit. I'll be needing two types of needles for the snail, the chenille, which are larger needles, and a crewel needle. Now the kit does not come with all of the floss that's needed to embroider the snail. It does come with the chameleon 49 to embroider the body of the snail. However, it does not come with the chameleon number 70 for the shell. I did, however, have the replacement thread, DMC 632, that I will use for the shell. The kit also includes a shiny metallic thread that I will need. Using all 6 strands of DMC 632 floss, I am going to thread the chenille number 16 needle, and using 2 strands of the same floss, I will thread a crewel needle. I'm bringing out both the needles through the fabric at the center of the snail's back through the same hole. And now I'm going to measure out about 4 centimeters that I will need to wrap the thread to form the body of the snail. Now I've arrested the 6 strands here to hold it taut, and I'm going to use the other needle with the 2-stranded floss to just sort of wrap around the anchor thread. I've arrived at the 4.5 centimeter mark, and now I'm just sort of smoothing out the coil, and I'm going to end it off by just looping 2 loops here. Now, snipping off the coil, I'm going to wrap it or coil it around to form the shell, and I'm going to use the 1 strand of the metallic thread to couch it in place. While I'm twisting around the coil here and couching it, I must say that I'm finding this particular Stumpwork kit to be really interesting. I'm learning a lot of different techniques, and Lorna Bateman's instructions are absolutely spot on. So I'm just following her instructions and repeating them in my own way as I, record this video for you. I must say, however, that Stumpwork does take a lot of time and patience, and I can speak from experience as this particular kit took me more than 6 months to complete, mainly because I was juggling work and embroidery at the same time. Now that the shell is done, I am going to use a milliner's needle and use 2 strands of the chameleon 49 to stitch 2 bullion knots for the body of the snail. I finally reached my favorite part of the kit, and that is stitching the Stumpwork wings. So the dragonfly and the butterfly wings. Now the kit does not come with threads for the body of the dragonfly here, so I'm going to use some light colored floss, variated floss that I have in my stock. Now here is the organza ribbon needed for the dragonfly. However, I need some bonder web, but there was very little bonder web included in the kit, so I am going to use fusible web that you can buy from any craft store, and you can see that it's just a thin tape, very see-through, which you can then iron onto fabric and it sort of fuses two fabrics together. I've cut out a small piece and I'm going to keep that aside. Next, I will be using the paper covered florist wire to shape the wings of the dragonfly, and I'll be using my mini straightener. Now, if you don't have a straightener, that's fine. You can also use a normal iron first to iron the ribbons. Now, this is the floss that came in the kit. It's sort of a variated bluish green floss that I will need for the wings, and I am going to trace out or sort of approximate the size of the wings by using the pattern that's in the instructions. To form the wings, I'm going to place it on the organza ribbon and cut out a piece of the fusible web, which I will then put under the wings, like so. So it's a bit slippery, so you have to hold it down. I'm folding the organza ribbon over it, and now I have to fuse the ribbon over the wire, and I'm going to iron it with my straightening iron using the tracing paper so that the organza ribbon doesn't melt. So here we have it. It's well fused, and I'm going to do the same with 3 additional wings. The next step is to overcast the wires with buttonhole stitch, and here I am using the light blue variated thread that's in the kit, and you can see here I'm just starting by knotting the thread into place and then beginning the buttonhole stitch along the length of the wire. Now it's important to keep in mind that you have to stitch really close to the wire, and it helps to stitch stab stitches so that you can get close to the wire rather than what I'm doing right now, that is just in one sweep going under the wires. I find when I switched it to stab stitches, it was easier to get closer to the wire. The buttonhole stitches are done. That's the front, this is the back, and to end off I am just going to go in between or under the threads behind the wire to hide the ends. Next I'm going to take the metallic wire that's in the kit to stitch the veins of the wings. Now this is the front and that's the back, and I'm going to start the stitch from the back, and to arrest the thread I'm going to go in between the stitches behind the wire as I did when I ended off, and then I'll proceed to embroider fly stitches to create the veins. The final step is to take a very sharp embroidery scissor and cut around the wings very close to the buttonhole stitch, ensuring that I don't snip the embroidery threads by accident. Next, I'm going to stitch the butterfly wings, and I'm going to use the beautiful pink and mauve organza wings. Now, the kit does not come with the pink floss for the edges, nor does it come with the pink metallic thread for the veins. It only comes with these two black metallic threads. So I have decided to use my own threads. Essentially, I'm going to use an Anchor 316 for the edge and DMCE 316 for the veins. And I'm going to use the white paper covered florist wire. Now here are the 4 dragonfly wings. I'm just going to keep them aside and stitch them once the background embroidery is completed. Now for the butterfly wings, I've already created little loops with the wires, and I essentially measured using the pattern in the instructions here. So a larger circle for the back wing and a smaller one for the front wing. The process is pretty much the same, so I will show you how to do one of the wings. And of course, first we have to iron the organza ribbons before we start. The buttonhole stitches are done, and now I've decided not to use the pink metallic thread, but to use variated metallic thread that's in my supply. I think it looks better than the pink, gives more contrast, and it's slightly lighter and more subtle than the black metallic thread that's included in the kit. I'm going to use the metallic thread in the kit for the legs of the dragonfly, and I'm going to use what's called cotton garden threads from Australia, and I'm going to use birch bark for the abdomen, and I'm going to use 2 strands of that, and then I'm going to use Chameleon 91, which is included in the kit for the body of the dragonfly. Using back stitches, I am going to stitch the outline for the legs of the dragonfly here. For the abdomen, I am going to stitch a raised stem band here, and I'll first stitch stab stitches all along the length of the abdomen. You'll see behind that I'm not crossing under the abdomen. I am just taking in and out the needle from the same side, so you get a neat finish in the back. Now taking the needle, I'm going under the stab stitches here without piercing the fabric, and sort of going 1 stab stitch at a time. And then I am going to stitch a couple of rows here. So this is the second row that I am stitching. With the metallic thread, I am going to stitch straight stitches along the abdomen. For the body, I'm going to use turkey stitch, and essentially I'm starting with the end unsecured and starting from the front of the fabric. So as you saw, I went 1 millimeter back, and now I'm going about 1 millimeter forward. And to secure the stitch in place, I'm coming back in at the start of the stitch and then tightening it against the fabric to form the loop. So this way I am securing the stitch with little back stitches while I'm creating loops. Now this essentially creates sort of a carpet pile look, and it's great for sort of filling up an area. And at the end of finishing all the loops, I'm gonna just snip it or trim all of the loops down until I get a nice tufting look. For the butterfly body, I am going to stitch a cast on bullion stitch. So take the thread between your forefinger and thumb and then just cast on. And I'm going to cast on 7 loops around the needle to form the top of the butterfly's body. To make the Stumpwork leaves, I'm using the slip that is in the kit. Now, the slip's a bit small and it does not fit in the 6-inch hoop that I have, so I have just added these strips of cloth by just tacking them on, which should help me to embroider 2 acorn leaves and a 3rd leaf for the rose, which is this particular one here. First, I'm going to trace the leaf for the rose at the top of the slip here. Next up is stitching the tracing paper onto the fabric, and this will be used as the base for the acorn leaves. I will need the florist green wire here to form the veins of the acorn leaf, and I will use the Chameleon 57 floss that's included in the kit, and I'll use 2 strands of it to stitch the leaves. I've bent the green wire here, and I'm going to tack it or stitch it onto the tracing paper. Essentially, you can see that it pretty much fits within the size of the tracing paper that's included in the kit. I'm going to start the embroidery from the front of the hoop here, and I'll do that by anchoring the thread onto the wire before I start the buttonhole stitch. To stitch the second row, I am just going to go into one of the loops and continue to stitch the buttonhole stitch. I just have to make sure that I don't pull those loops too tight, as I will need them for the 3rd, 4th rows as well. I'm starting a new thread here, and I am anchoring the thread by stitching a knot on one of the buttonhole stitch loops. And this is the 3rd row of buttonhole stitches. I'm skipping a few loops here to get this nice slant for the shape of the leaf, and you can see that when you don't pull the loops too tight, you can see the loops easily to be able to hook onto them or stitch on the buttonhole stitch. This particular embroidery technique is also called Needlelace, and you can see that it looks a little bit like lace when it's completed. For the 4th row, I am going to work 3 stitches onto every 4th stitch. So this is my 2nd stitch and my third stitch. And now on my fourth stitch, in that loop, I'm gonna stitch 3 stitches and then 6 stitches at the top of the loop. So that was 1. Now this is 2, and this is 3. Here's a different view where I'm stitching 3 stitches onto the 4th stitch. So that's 1, that's 2, and then that's 3. Now I'm not sure if I'm getting this exactly as Lorna's instructions. It wasn't really very clear on how to do this, so I'm just working at it as I see fit, and I think it's coming out pretty well. Let's see how it looks like when it's completed. I don't see the curves as well, but I think when I finish off a couple more rows, I should be able to see that. So you can see here that in the 4th stitch I've done 3 stitches, and you can see a little bit of a knob forming here at the top of the stitch. You'll see that I've gently pushed the embroidery work together to form those beautiful ruffles, and now I'm just whip stitching the central vein together. Now don't these just look gorgeous? Here are my acorn leaves, and now I have to stitch them onto the acorns. And I'm going to do that first by stitching the acorns that I've completed, so the covered acorns, and then I'm going to stitch on the leaves. I feel like I'm already seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. This was a huge project, and it took a lot of patience and a lot of work, but absolutely rewarding. Just look at how cute my acorns look. With a chenille number 18 needle, which is pretty thick, I'm gonna create a hole here that I can use to insert the acorn, and then I'm gonna stitch it into place and whip the back of the wires flat on the back of the fabric. I'm going to add the tendrils here for the grape leaves. So if you look at the picture again, you'll see that there are 3 tendrils here, 1, 2, and 3. And to do that, I am going to first cut off 3 lengths of florist wire here. To end off, I am just going to stitch a knot into the last stitch, and then I'm going to leave this end of the thread so I can stitch it onto the fabric. And now, using the largest chenille needle in the kit, I am just going to twist it around the needle to form squiggly loops here to get that tendril effect. For the rose petals, first I am going to stitch the Stumpwork petals using the white florist wire here and the Chameleon 91, which is the watermelon color thread in the kit. Now I ran out of tracing paper in the kit, so I used some from my stock, and I have tacked the wire onto the tracing paper and the fabric, as you can see. Using rows of detached chain stitch, I'm going to embroider the rose petals, And when I finish, it will look like needlelace. So sometimes this particular embroidery is called needle lace work. And honestly, this was one of the reasons why I bought Lorna Bateman's kit. I wanted to learn how to embroider this gorgeous lace looking work, and maybe use it for some of my own designs later on. Now, before attaching the Stumpwork rose petals, I'm going to fill each of the petals of the flowers drawn on the fabric with buttonhole stitch. So here I'm first outlining it with back stitch and then stitching the normal buttonhole stitches for the first row, and then detach buttonhole stitches for the subsequent rows. This creates a shadow effect behind the wired rows and adds another dimension to the work. With the thick chenille needle, I am going to pierce a hole and insert the ends of the wired petals here and sort of position it in place. I'm going to anchor it with a few straight stitches onto the wires here to disguise it with the stitches there, and whip essentially the wires onto the backing cloth. Now here I'm just stitching French knots for the center, and I'm gonna add some yellow beads to give it a little bit of sparkle. I'm adding the final touches to the rose with the beadwork, and here is the final look, or almost the final look. Now, if you've watched the video this far, Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. That really helped my channel grow. And don't forget to share it with all of your friends if you think this will be useful to them. Now, the final thing to do before I complete this beautiful stump work is to complete the wired leaf for the rose. As you can see here, I'm using the florist green wire to outline the leaf that I had sort of traced onto the fabric some time ago in the video. And now I am going to stitch buttonhole stitches to attach the wire to the fabric before I stitch satin stitch or leaf stitch to fill the center of the leaf. Now that I've cut off the fabric, I'm going to use mint green permanent alcohol pro markers to cover up sort of the white fabric that you can see along the edges here. Doesn't look so nice. I mean, typically you'd probably use green fabric maybe for the leaves, but here I'm using the fabric that's in the kit. And same thing with the others, inserting the wired leaf into the embroidery fabric and then stitching the wire flat onto the backing fabric. And there we have it. Congratulations for getting this far with me and for sticking it out. You've completed one of Lorna Bateman's most gorgeous stump work kits. Now, an embroidery work is not complete until you finish it and frame it. So here, the last part of my video is just walking you through framing the embroidery. I'm going to use the super handy frame that I bought on Etsy, the link for which is in the description below if you're interested. But here it is, my framed embroidery. Isn't this absolutely gorgeous? Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and click the notification buttons to watch all of my videos. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye-bye.